A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. Not as I was on Monday, wearing a beanie and a scarf and a jacket that had me looking like a youthful Scot heading to the South Pole, but it is still rather chilly in Johannesburg, as I suspect it's going to be around South Africa for the next few months, which means over the next little while there's going to be rather a lot of good red wine filtering through the show as we give you some recommendations to take on winter and to see it off with some of South Africa's finest. And indeed, that is part of this evening's show. A little later on, we're going to be heading out to reborn, revived Stellenbosch estate and trying some great red wine from a young winemaker who seems far too young to have done as much as she has done. I don't think there's a wine country in the world she hasn't pulled off a harvest. Lorraine Burger from Stellenzicht will be with me just a little later on in the show. And in a moment, as we continue 2021 celebrations of all things effervescent, Cap Classique, 50 years old in 2021. Well, we've got a couple from somebody who's making his own Cap Classique, but he does come from a venerable family of winemakers, and in particular, bubbles makers. Matthew Krone will be with me in just a moment. A great show, both bubbles and some lovely Stellenbosch red wine. Before we jump into those, though, just a couple of things to run you through. Reminder that coming up on the 24th of June, the 24th of June, we are having a rather special evening out, except it's an evening in. It's a virtual wine dinner with Paul Kluver. Those invitations will go out to Wine Club members, which get you a great discount on a night of food and fine wine with Lorraine Burger, their winemaker. And I'll be hosting that chance to learn how to make some great dishes and wash them down with some splendid wine from Elgin. So that is up on the 24th. Also coming up, we've got some wine around International Rosé Day. We've also got wine coming up in celebration of Shannon Drink Shannon Day. That is Friday the 18th. On Monday, we chatted to the Ken Forrester team, to Low Stradum, and we'll be broadcasting out of 96 Winery Road and or Ken Forrester Vineyards. I'm not entirely sure which, but either way, drinking some Shannon, pairing up with some lovely Asian food, meeting some sommeliers from Japan, and celebrating how Chenin Blanc continues to charge around the world, making South Africa proud and winning new fans every single day. So that is coming up. Also this week online, our regular recorded episode. It's at Marble. We're there from time to time. And it is with Mutle Mogase, the man behind Epicurean, along with his fellow founders, Mosen Gosheng and Mazima Shilowa. And he tells me the story of how they kicked off the Epicurean as we sample the latest vintage and get a great story of three mates who decided they want to make some wine. And that is a rather appropriate segue, because my first guest today is one of three mates who decided they wanted to make some wine. But unlike Muhle, Mos, and Baziwa, in this case, the gentleman I'm about to speak to, well, he's not too bad at making wine himself. In fact, his family have been making it since about 200 BC by my calculation. So let's head over to the man who now makes the Aristea wines, as well as wine for various other people, but is probably best known for his surname. It's Matthew Krone. Matthew, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Dan, thank you very much. And yeah, thank you for that intro. I'm not sure if that makes me 200 or something, or just the family, but yeah, thank you very much.
It is a ridiculous dynasty, and we do have many families in the South African wine business who have got long and established relationships with winemaking, wine growing, wine sales. I think 8% of all people in the industry are Finlaysons one way or another. We've got lots of fathers, sons, the Stakelers at Kaapstad, the Larishes at Lariche, lots of families passing things on. But you guys have gone a bit extreme, because I think, are you the 12th generation of winemaker in your family?
Yeah, in our family, it's over 300 years of winemaking history. I actually, a few years ago, I went and just out of interest, wanted to see, when you do the whole family tree and investigate it, and it literally was about 12 generations of everybody in one way or another making wine. And my father and my grandfather were two of the big greats in the South African wine industry. And my grandfather, in fact, was one of the pillars of the industry. He was the founder of the cold fermentation process. And recognized internationally for that. So, yeah, it's in the blood. I don't know if it's just in the blood or if I come from a long line of illustrious alcoholics, but we take our winemaking and our wine drinking very seriously.
it's probably a healthy middle ground there somewhere, and it's a middle ground I think you're always going to find yourself in, because I can't imagine, Matthew, you sitting your parents down at the dinner table aged 18 and telling them, you know what, Mum, Dad, as much as the family likes to make wine, I've decided my dream is to become a plumber. It probably wasn't ever going to happen, was it?
Well, yeah, like, I mean, I'm one of 4 sons, so it was never sort of obligatory, but it was just something that always just drew me back. It's a passion for it, you know. There's something about it that's just, I don't know how to describe it or how to put it there, but it literally, it calls you back. It calls you every time there's harvest, every time the grapes are coming in. There's an energy, there's a passion, there's an excitement to it that I haven't found in anything else. It's just amazing.
Your turn of phrase is getting some approval. Saying illustrious alcoholics. It's a fabulous turn of phrase, isn't it? Applied to the Kroner family. The Kroner family that we know from the estate. The bubbles are still going, but I know that it's not a space you are part of anymore. In fact, am I right in saying, and I hope I've got this right, there was actually one point where you decided, you know, I'm done with wine. I'm not going to make any wine anymore at all, ever. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's going back a number of years. We actually unfortunately lost the old family farm end of 2012, and at the end of 2013, the Kroner family parted ways entirely with the Kroner brand and with the farm. I went through quite a dark space at that point where I thought I was done with wine. I thought, you know, I was finished. I didn't want to make any more wine. I tried my hand at flour import export business that was a good business at the time, but it didn't really excite me. And in fact, I stopped drinking wine as well. For about 6 months, I just drank beer. I think I picked up about 5 or 6 kilograms over that time. And then a good friend of mine actually phoned me and said, look, you know, you're never going to make peace with yourself until you actually go for it and come back to the wine industry. It's in your blood. And met up with some people, started something, and it literally, the moment it started, it's just good things have been happening ever since. It's spectacular, and that's kind of how Aristea also was born.
Give us a little more on those two friends, because there's this trio behind the brand. You seem to have struck a space that is really working for you. What is the friendship, and how did the drive into this Aristea brand come about, other than just your mates wanting to get you back into the wine world?
Well, look, it started at a very good mutual winemaker friend who invited us over for a bride at his house, and there were a whole bunch of winemakers there, and a guy called Martin Krajewski. He's my British partner, and at this point I didn't know who Martin was, but Martin owned some properties in Saint-Emilion and in Pomerol, and he used to have a big property in Bordeaux itself, which he sold to Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, you know, the richest Chinaman in the world. So, you know, Martin's this big famous Englishman who's bought all his properties in France or in Bordeaux, started some amazing brands, and he was out there. I had no idea who he was, but we were drinking some amazing wines that night. And I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase, but, you know, no good story ever starts with somebody saying this, one day I was eating a salad. It started after a number of good bottles of wine, and you know, Martin and myself really hit it off. I had no idea who the guy was, and at some point, you know, I think the conversation went along the lines of Martin saying to me, "So, can you make wine?" I think my answer was, "Yeah, I think so," and he said, "Well, you know, he'd love to do something together," and that was kind of how the initial thing started. It was just out of a bit of fun. I had my own business on the side that I'd started also in the wine game already. Supplying, you know, various retailers and various people, and Martin sort of offered me the opportunity to really do something premium, really something exciting. So we started back in the end of 2014, beginning of 2015 vintage, and the very first wines we actually made was our 2015 vintage. So Martin was keen on doing a Cabernet Sauvignon, and I said, well, if you want me to make a cab, I want to make an MCC. You know, that's in the blood. That's kind of part of who I am. So that's how we started with the first vintage, and it grew from there. You know, Martin came back at the end of the year, loved it, said, look, you know, he wants to include a Chardonnay into the mix. So I said, fine, then I want to make a rosé, or rosé MCC. So it kind of just, you know, built from that there. To the point now, Aristea, it's myself, it's Martin, and we have a French partner as well, Florent Demeaux, So Florent actually consults for Martin in Bordeaux at his properties, and he also consults for some of the big brands out here in South Africa. So we brought Florent in as well. So it's an Englishman, a South African, and a Frenchman. It sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke, but it really works. I mean, each of us are at the top of our game in the wine industry, making some spectacular wines in our own sort of brands, our own businesses there. And the idea was just, what do you do if you combine, three people in the industry, three amazing sort of, wine industry people, and try and create something that's bigger or more than ourselves. And that's pretty much how it came. Martin, okay, he won't admit it, but he literally gives me an unlimited budget to go and play. I go out, we can go and source the very best grapes, go out to the best vineyards. And Aristea is kind of born out of that there, with the idea that, we've selected the best regions for the best cultivars. Like our Cabernet Sauvignon comes from Stellenzicht. Our Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon comes from Elgin. Our Pinot Noir comes from Himmel and Arda. So we literally go and find the best regions for the best grapes. And we buy in enough fruit to produce between 12 to 18,000 bottles of each of the wines, but we will only ever bottle 6,000 bottles of each, or 1,000 cases of each. And the idea is to go and cherry pick the best grapes, bring them into the cellars, make the best wines you can, and then only pick the best wines and bottle the absolute, sort of the crown jewels. So much so that currently, even though we're only doing 1,000 cases of each wine, we're selling to, I think, 12 countries around the world, pretty much on allocation. The wines have received amazing international acclaim. We've did tours in Decanter Mag and all these, there's big magazines, and everywhere it's just been this phenomenal journey. And Aristea, the name Aristea actually comes from the flower. So there's a flower that grows only in the Western Cape and certain regions of Madagascar called the Aristea. So we actually had one of South Africa's preeminent botanical artists. She drew us a beautiful painting of an Aristea in her garden, and we used that on the bottle. So if you look at the labels of the bottles, we've got the Aristea there. And the reason for that was, behind the Aristea was, Aristea is this flower that grows in the most inhospitable places, up in the mountains, and there's amazing crags. And, it kind of, you can't really plant it where you want it to go. It will do what it wants to do. But after a big disaster, when there's a big landslide or a big fire, like we recently had down here in the Cape, all the Aristeas tend to come up. There's these bulbs that grow under the ground, stay under the ground, and they can last for about 50 odd years. And then these bulbs come out, these beautiful flowers, and each flower opens for one day, kind of like a bottle of wine when you open it up. So our tagline is against the odds. What's the odds of this flower actually surviving and living the way it does? What are the odds of an Englishman, a South African, and a Frenchman getting together? Myself getting back into the industry and all that there. And it's been the most magical sort of partnership to work with the absolute best people and to be able to produce the most amazing and the best possible wines.
And there's a wonderful, wonderful story. I'm looking at the bottle now. You can see that it is from the Cape because the Aristea itself has actually been blown sideways by the wind, which is why the label looks like it does. What also does suddenly become clear to me is that you are buying in all these grapes, but you're not using all of them. You're just handpicking what you need. You have, as you say, got an unlimited budget to play, basically to fund this adventure of yours. That's why Martin had to sell to Jack Ma. He's the only person who could afford to give him the amount of money he needed to pay for you. Would that be right there, Mr. Kroner?
Well, I really hope Martin's not listening to this there, but yeah, okay. Look, we don't call it an unlimited budget, but the idea behind Aristea has never been, kind of just to try and make money. As ironic as that sounds, most wine farms or most brands, let's say you make 50 odd barrels, you try and use as many barrels as possible and you want to recover as much of your money. And when you sell the products, when you're tasting the barrels, this one's great, this one's good, this one's okay, but you'll blend them together and you'll make a decent wine or a good wine to try and sell it. With Aristea, we only pick the very best. So the ultimate aim isn't about trying to make this mass volume brand that can make lots of money for us. This is about creating something more than ourselves, about creating something purely with passion. The quality that we've been able to pull out with this, the ability to go and get the best grapes from the best regions once again. Like for example, lots of wineries. Say somebody in Stellenbosch wants to make a Pinot Noir, he'd grow Pinot Noir on his farm, and they make some beautiful wines. They're beautiful Pinots, but the best Pinot Noir grapes themselves come from Hemelanade. Likewise, Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, Elgin. It's a terroir sort of situation there. So Aristea, we've kind of gone a little bit. I feel like I'm cheating, to be honest. So with Aristea, with working with an amazing partner like Martin and with Florent, to be able to create these products and these wines that just blows everybody away. And at the end of the day, it's we spend probably more than half our time on the brand or on the wines. We have our day job where we have to make our real money, but this is passion. This is straight from the heart.
I suspect if you look back at those darker times when you had to say goodbye to the farm, when you weren't in a good space, as you've already said earlier on the show, you probably wouldn't have imagined that wine would once again be giving you as much joy as it clearly is now.
Oh, look, definitely. I think I've been quite privileged in my life. With my wife was amazing and supportive and always believed in me. I've started various businesses, various companies, different brands, of my own stuff that I'm doing, for various clients. I consult for a number of producers. I've produced a few other products outside of the wine industry as well. Normally anything that's alcohol related, I tend to have fun with that there. But it comes back down to also, what I learned from my dad and from my grandfather. They were my two biggest heroes growing up, and it was always this amazing thing to be able to, to kind of go to them with something that I've made, put it on the table and say, what do you think? So I don't know how much time we've got, but one of my favorite stories was the very first vintage that my dad sort of told me to take over the cellar to run it. I'd done one vintage under him after I'd finished studying. And the second vintage, my dad said, right, you're ready, get into the cellar. And I took over. Everything was by the book. The grapes came in, was perfect, was optimum. I did everything as was meant to do, finished the fermentation, everything was done. We blocked the wines, we stacked it there. And I think it was probably sometime in early April or end of March. And we were busy tasting the wines. We were sitting out in the stoep outside my dad's house. And I drew all the samples of all the tanks and the barrels, and I put them on the table, and we were busy tasting. And my dad said to me, so, what do you think of the wine? And I tasted them, and they were all perfect. They were spot on as you kind of want them to be. I just said, Dad, look, technically everything's fine. I said, but there's something missing. I don't know what I've done. I think I made a mistake. I don't know what I missed. And he laughed and he said, look, the same story that he's going to tell me now, or that I just went through, happened to him. At the end of the 60s, he'd studied at Geisenheim in Germany, and he came back, and as you come out of university, you know everything, or you think you do. And my grandfather, same thing, told my dad, the cellar's yours. My dad went in, did everything, same thing. They sat on the same stoop tasting their wines, and he said the same thing to my grandfather. And my granddad just said to me, he said, good, this is the most valuable lesson in wine. You got to remember the guy upstairs also wants to make wine, so don't just get in his way. You got to do what nature wants to do. Don't just do what the textbook says, or what the formula says, or what your recipe says. So each vintage has that sort of element to it, where your job as winemaker isn't to go and take the grapes and force it. It's not like Coca-Cola, where you're adding so much water, so much sugar, and creating your product. It's there's an elegance, there's a finesse to it. You got to do what the grapes want to do, bring it into the cellar. Gentle extraction, and follow each vintage, follow the grapes. Minimal intervention, but at times the job as winemakers to kind of coax it in the right direction. And that for me was one of the greatest privileges.
I love that sense of the passing of the baton from generation to generation. It's a fantastic piece of family history to share. Johan van Eck, who's watching on Facebook, terroir-specific viticulture is the best, makes for great wine, also creates very good industry for selling wine grapes. And thanks, Johan, and good to have you watching the show again. And Nonqabela Shaba with a query. Wow, that's a fantastic story. And of course, MCC had to feature. It sounds very exclusive. Are these strictly premium wines or accessible to the ordinary Joe soap?
Well, yeah. For Aristea, the biggest fight that Martin and I had was about allocation. So, Martin sells his Saint-Emilion and Pomerol wines all over the world. So obviously everybody wanted a piece of the action. So we agreed that I'm allowed to keep 10% for South Africa. So I have 100 cases of each wine available in South Africa, of the Aristea wines. Go look at our website, aristeawines.com. There'll be links onto it, and you can find where you can get it. But it is allocation basis, unfortunately. I try and keep some to drink for myself, but it tends to be like we've got these clients in Canada that want to take everything, or a Japanese client wants everything, and you're kind of like, oh, I can only give you so many cases. But we're having fun. And also in terms of pricing, like I said, the aim with this wasn't to I'm not saying we want to make money. Obviously, it's paying for itself. But we definitely could be charging 3-4 times the amount that we're charging for the wines. We don't. We want to share it with people. So we do want as many people as possible to enjoy it, and to share their experiences with us.
All right, well, let's see if this wine is worth all of the hype and Frenchmen and Englishmen sending it all over the world to different corners. We have 2 of the bubbles, which are obviously the Kroner specialty in terms of the DNA. And I'm particularly excited about this first one, Matthew, because this is a brut and it goes back to 2015. So not only a specific vintage where so much of the bubbles we drink tends to be non-vintage, but also a lovely bit of bottle age to it. Tell me, first of all, why it is important to you to go with a specific vintage as opposed to the non-vintage house style, and then give us a bit of background to this particular wine.
Well, okay, the reason for the vintage comes back down to the whole thing with working with nature. Each vintage for me has a special story, has a special memory. Kind of like when you smell something, when you taste something, it triggers a memory in the back of your mind. And likewise for us, we try and keep consistency year on year. And in fact, for a vintage product, you're allowed to blend up to 15% of an older vintage into whatever the vintage is. So as long as 85% of a vintage is from that vintage, you can call it that vintage. So it's a trick I learned from some of my friends in the Champagne, where they actually have almost like the sherry Solera system, where they take the older wine or older sherries and top up the younger barrels to top up the older barrels. Likewise, you use some of the older wine to get that consistency year on year. But you also get, the elegance, the finesse that comes out of each vintage. So, for Aristea, for our MCC Blancs, we do a minimum of 3 years bottle fermentation. I think this one we actually fermented. I'm not sure which one you got on the 15. We disgorged it in 2 batches. So we launched the first batch, and then we did a second disgorgement about a year later for the second batch. But the 2015 was the first one that we brought out there. I think we're currently selling our 2016 vintage as well right now. So I'd actually love to hear what you think about that, the 2015. It should be quite beautiful now.
It is indeed. I'm getting to drink so much Cup Classique this year because of Cup Classique celebrations, and every bottle, as well as telling their own story, is just a reminder of how we both do Cup Classique so well in South Africa, but also how there are so many differences and subtleties and nuances to all of this. And when you get one that's a little bit older and it's just got a bit more breadth to it, and it's got some real richness to it, and you've got a wine that rewards hanging on to it, and in my case, stopping members of my family from trying to drink it before we got to today. And it's become a wine that's, I think, even more than it was when it started out. This is sitting beautifully. And I think on top of just being made by somebody who is clearly from a family who know what they're doing, just another reminder of why our Cup Classique, when it is of a vintage year, does really reward just hanging on to a couple more years and just letting it develop that fullness and richness a little more.
Cheers. Thanks very much. Yeah, look, I think the big mistake a lot of us do in South Africa, or a lot of the new world producers, is we get into the idea of an MCC. It's 12 months bottle fermentation. 12 months is the minimum. If you look in the Champagne, the way that they normally work is a non-vintage would normally ferment for at least 2 to 3 years. A vintage would be about 5 years, and their prestige cuvee would be 7 to 9 years. So I love the older MCCs. I love the older Champagnes. The depth, the flavor, the character just really shows up there. And I think I use these 2 words the most, but it kind of is what I like to define my wines is the elegance and the finesse. It's kind of like it has to be layered. The textures have to be layered. So it's not just one-dimensional. As the wine ferments, the longer you leave the wines, and specifically the MCCs, it just develops, specifically on the lees, the subtle aromas, the biscuitiness, the yeastiness. It's intense. It kind of has to tickle you in the back of the brain and make you want to come back for another sip. Well, at least that's what I hope there.
Quick technical question before we jump onto the rosé. What have I actually got in my glass?
It's a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, the two classical French champagne varietals, and it's predominantly Chardonnay. I can't remember the exact composition of the 15, but I think it was about between 80 and 85% Chardonnay and the rest Pinot Noir.
Sounds about right. It doesn't quite have a Blanc de Blanc feel, but it's not a hell of a long way off. Composition is delightful. And you suspect that generation 12 of the Kroners is doing generations 1 through 11 rather proud. Let's see if that applies to the rosé as well. I love asking some of the simpler questions because a lot of the people who tune in and watch are also, like me, learning a little bit about wine. So we've got one that's pale, we've got one that's rosé, just at a very, very simple workman-like level. Why the difference in color?
Well, the color comes from the Pinot Noir. So when you crush your grapes, the juice that comes off the grapes is actually, it's white, it's a clear juice. So even the red grapes you get, I mean, the red wines that you drink, the color of the juice that comes out of the grapes themselves is white. By leaving it on the skins a bit longer, you extract the color from the skins. So the Pinot Noir component in the rosé is slightly more, and it has been left on the skins not too long. I only left it for about, I think, 2 to 3 days with enough to ferment on the skin. The juice itself, we left it a bit longer just to withdraw it a bit there. For the MCC itself, I'm running 2 different wines now. MCC, you press your juice, you only take about 500 liters per ton, which you extract and you ferment separately. And then the Pinot Noir, the bit that remains after you've drawn off your 500 liters, you leave that on the skins a bit and you just slowly start to ferment it. And then a portion of that I draw off and I ferment separately as well. So that's where the color comes from there. So it's not a very dark color. It's a very, very light color. I don't like those sort of garishly pink sparkling wine colors that you tend to find in the sweeter sparkling ranges there. So it's a very light salmony color. But once again, elegance, finesse, same qualities, I hope.
Yeah, we actually used not for wine, but for looking at a particular color, not like this. We were trying to describe it yesterday when we were filming the Dan Nichols show, and we came out as it was probably German tourists 6 hours into a holiday in Cape Town. That's pretty much the color they've got to by about then. I think we're in a space now where we understand that rosé's days of being sweet and saccharine and sickly are not completely over, because there's still a market for that, and that's absolutely fine. There are people who enjoy that, and that's absolutely wonderful. It's just not really my particular glass of wine, and so you get something that's a lot more savory and a lot more subtle, and I think a lot more rewarding as a result. So let's try it. Let's see if Mr. Kroner has got a second one right. It's probably pure luck based on genes if he's got this far. It's obviously younger. This is a 17. I had the 15, so it's naturally a little bit fresher, a little bit zestier. It's got a little bit more life to it, and they make a lovely pairing. And in fact, I think I'm going to pair them together for most of the rest of this evening. So if there are reports of a naked man swimming in his home in Johannesburg later tonight, despite the cold, that could well be me. Just before we let you go, Matthew, a question, first a comment followed by a question from Mpo Mkwanazi. The color looks beautiful. A golden yellow, that referred to that brute first up, and it certainly was. Reminded me of the hair of a young Wynand Olivier, for those of you of a rugby persuasion. He had beautiful hair. And then Impo following up, what glasses would you recommend to drink this wine? And I think that's a great question, because I've drunk champagne out of everything from a paper cup to a beer draft glass, just what's handy. And there are different people. Some will argue it has minimal impact. Others will burst into tears if you try and give them champagne in cups that isn't anything but what they really want to drink it in. If I drop round to the Kroner home to help spend some of Martin's budget on a marketing visit, what would you be serving my Aristea bubbles in, Matthew?
Well, I think just to answer the question, I mean, your traditional sort of glasses that people like are the flutes. Those long sort of deep flute stems there. And everybody thought that, because champagne or MCC, the bubble sort of rises to the top there, so it releases the flavor naturally there. And you've also got those, the coupe, supposedly molded on Marie Antoinette's bosoms, but I'm not sure about that. And the way that, say about 10 years ago, up until 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, everybody suggested the flutes. You wanted those long stem flutes. But in fact, in Champagne now, they're all going back to using tulip-shaped glasses. So what you're doing there now, like a white wine glass, slightly narrower, but slightly, tapered to the top, because the bubbles, as I said, it releases the aromas, releases all the flavor, and you want the tapering the top to sort of condense it to bring it up. So when you're busy smelling it, when you put your nose in the glass there, exactly like that, those actually work beautifully. And in Champagne, they do say that Champagne is a white wine, whether it's a white or rosé. It's considered a white wine, so drink it as a white wine. Whichever glasses you got at home, as long as they're clean and as long as they're big enough to have a few nice glasses, I'm quite happy with it. I personally do like a nice flute, but I like the Riedel ones. They're sort of a bit longer, so they almost do look a bit tulipy shapes with quite a nice high top there.
All right. I know we've got a couple of regular fans of the show, starting with my mother, for whom the preferred method is out of the bottle. But I think glass, at least for the first few, is a little more elegant. Matthew, thank you. We'll look forward to having you back on the show again soon, so we can talk about some of the other wines that Martin forces you to make so you can indulge in your bubbles. But for now, thank you. Might not be on Kroner itself, but very much keeping the family tradition and legacy alive and doing so brilliantly on this evening's evidence. So thank you for it and really appreciate the time.
Thanks very much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
There we go. Matthew Krone, Twee Jonge Gezinnen, which I think is Austrian. That is the Kroner family's latest iteration. Matthew, who's making the Aristea wines named after that beautiful flower with a slightly tragic story here. It's only going for 1 day, which is probably longer than most of Matthew's wines last after they've been opened, because they are rather Moorish. So there we go. Shaba saying a big thank you. Lovely to have you on the show. Don't go away, though, because we now move to our second guest. And as I have a last sip of the rosé from 2017, let's head over to Stellenbosch and to a wine estate which has got a rather personal history for me. But before I explain that history, let me welcome in our guest. And I'm really excited to have her on because she has got a wonderful wine career behind her already, and she's still alarmingly young for somebody who's done quite so much. Lorraine Burger, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a great, great pleasure. I'm going to tell you a story, Lorraine, because normally I get other people to tell me stories, but I'm going to open up with one. A story that I suspect will not know of, but it is how Stellenzicht played a rather large role in me entering the wine industry. Now, you'll probably know that if you go back about 400 years, there was a guy called Guy Weber, who used to be the man at Stellenzicht. He's a great character, great part of the fabric. When I was still a sports journalist, our lifestyle editor at iafrica.com was complaining that she had too many invitations. She couldn't get to all of them. I volunteered, thinking this would be a great opportunity to go and drink free wine, knowing very little about wine other than that I liked it. And the very first invitation I had, Lorraine, was to go to Stellenzicht, and it was a vertical tasting. And I was quite surprised because I didn't realize there were tall buildings on the vineyards in Stellenbosch, because I thought a vertical tasting meant you stood at the top and you looked out over the vineyards and you watched them while you drank wine. And I spent 3 hours understanding nothing, but really enjoying it. And from there, promised myself I would learn everything I could. And 20 odd years later, now sitting on a wine show and coming full circle back to Stellenzicht. So for more reasons than you might have imagined, a very warm welcome to the show.
Cheapers, thank you. That's an awesome story, though. How was the vertical? Was it great?
I loved it, but I suspect at that stage you probably could have given me a Bulgarian Cabernet Sauvignon. My palate was a little less practiced at that stage. But what it did was that it gave me a great sense and understanding of the fact that I wanted to know about wine. I wanted to learn about wine. I wanted to make wine part of my life. And in your case, that's been something from pretty much the moment you could walk, because you've got the farming back, the agricultural background. This has been part of your life, I think, for as long as you can remember.
Yeah, pretty much. I grew up in Stellenzicht, so this has been home forever. And I won't go into detail, but I'm as Stellenbosch as they come. And yeah, so I grew up. My parents lived in a cottage on Jordan. So it's very much been part of my DNA. Growing up in Stellenbosch, being here, every year with the season, you see the little tractors running through through town. You're coming from sport practice and you're like stopping for the tractor. So it's very much something that's been kind of ingrained in me. And our family always. It was always about, the food and the wine on the table alongside friends. And then I'm a bit of a science geek. I love biology. I love science, and chemistry specifically. But I was one of those girls who I was like, just don't put me in a lab. I can't sit still. I really, really struggle to sit still. And so when I never thought of winemaking as a career, and when somebody suggested it, it was almost like, the thought that I just couldn't let go of it. And I, from the moment that I decided that's what I was going to do, and, I started telling people, I'm going to go study winemaking, everyone's like, of course you're going to be a winemaker. And it's just been love from the first moment. I can't see myself doing anything else. I love it. And I get to do a bit of chemistry and all those things on the side. But it keeps me out of trouble as well, because I get to not sit still ever, pretty much. I always say the cellar to me, especially harvest, it's like Disneyland for adults. I love it. It's got the greatest energy. And I can honestly say that I've never had a day where I'm just like, oh, I don't want to go to work. Like every day is different. Every day is amazing. I just really love what I do.
Well, I think in poem Kwanazi sums it up beautifully by saying, you're not a winemaker, but rather a wine artist, which is
thank you.
Praise. Thank you, Paul. Nina Barkhazen is very excited. Yay! Stellenzicht! Lots of exclamation marks. Well, Stellenzicht it is indeed. But the winemaker didn't go straight to Stellenzicht, and you didn't go straight into winemaking either, because such is your absolute obsession with this whole space that when you finished, you went off to Dijon, to the Burgundy University, to study wine business, did you not?
Yeah, so I actually, it's I kind of first worked. Like I said, the love affair with harvest season is very real for me, and so I first hopped off abroad, but then later on decided to go to Dijon, and I did my master's degree in wine business in France, which was a huge learning experience. It was also a great exposure to the international wine market, understanding different cultures, how they interact, how other people see wine. As a young winemaker, I think you're very much sometimes you think this is it, and it's amazing, but it's always great to just get that different perspective. So that was an amazing experience just as a whole, being immersed in the culture and the wine and the food. I mean, who doesn't want to eat baguette and cheese and wine every day, which pretty much, including pastries, was my diet for about a year. So yeah, it was an amazing experience. And I think I came back from France and everyone was like, oh, what are you going to do with this degree? And I was like, well, I don't know, but that experience, nobody can take that away from me. And it's incredible how now in my position here at Stellenzicht, I'm very much tapping into that experience and knowledge that I gained from that master's degree, with the renewal of Stellenzicht.
You're also able to tap into experience from, and let me see if I got this right, Marlborough, the Barossa Valley, California. You spent some time in Western Australia. You're in Bordeaux. There's rumors you made wine in Peru, Bolivia, and Malawi. You've kind of done everywhere possible. What were the highlights of those experiences, and how do you feel it shaped who you are today as not just a winemaker, but also a person, because it's such valuable life experience and not just wine experience?
Very much so. I mean, I think what you just said, I mean, life experience maybe topped wine experience with those harvests, just meeting incredible other winemakers, different ways of thinking about wine and winemaking. And every now and then you come up with an idea and someone like, where did you do that? How did you think of that? It's like, no, this is not my idea. But, one day in harvest in this country, we tried this. Let's see if it works here. So I think it's just that, different approach that you see taken to problem solving and winemaking and decision making. And so it's definitely been, it's completely shaped me as a winemaker. I remember one day I was doing a harvest and I wasn't having enjoying a particularly part of it. And somebody sent me an email and said, Lorraine, sometimes you're there to learn what not to do, not what to do. So, for the good, the bad, and the ugly, it was an amazing experience. And I'm still friends with most of those winemakers. I still keep contact. Other day, so it's like, we used this thing, I can't remember what it was, email, there we go. And they came back, it's like, oh, can you speak to this person? This is what we did, how's it going? So, those relationships, those friendships, it always feels like I've got a forever home in all those countries and friends that I can go visit. So, going back is never just like, oh, I'm just popping in. It's almost like, well, I have a few people I need to say hello to first. So no, incredible. Would do it over in a heartbeat.
Which leads to my follow-up question there. You're firmly entrenched at Stellenzicht, and I suspect you're having a great deal of fun and a really cool chapter in the life of Stellenzicht. But if you could go back and do one more harvest in one of the 82 places you've done harvests over the term of your short career, which is the one you'd go back to and why?
That's a very good question. Probably France. That was quite cool. It's one of those bucket list things for a winemaker, being able to do a harvest in France. And I was lucky enough in 2018 to go back again for about a week or two, not for harvest, but just kind of touring around and tasting and all that, and just the exposure to those wines and those winemakers and that thinking. And I think as a winemaker, I probably rely more on a California or Australia, because you can use what you did there a little bit more back here in South Africa. But just from I want to say heart and soul thing, and pure indulgence, probably France.
I love the fact there's just a little flicker of Californian accent that wanders through from time to time there. It does lead into an appropriate question, as you've chosen France. En question de pomme quoi nazi, maintenant tu peux parler le français?
Un petit peu. I wish I could say I still had great French abilities. It's definitely gone very much south since returning to South Africa. But it was actually, believe it or not, a 2020 goal to get my conversational French back up and running. And then unfortunately we had a little friend come and play havoc on 2020. So hopefully somewhere this year or next year, I can get that back up and running. So I can understand it, I can read it. But when I actually need to have a conversation, my vocabulary very much lets me down most of the time. So I think I probably sound like a 5-year-old trying to explain, I want that. But I get what I want, which is the important part.
Je pense qu'il devient plus sombre après le bouteille deuxième. So a little more wine and you'll be absolutely fine. Let's fast forward. You've traveled the world. You've dazzled them with your knowledge and love and understanding and passion for wine. Now back in South Africa, you've spent time at Waterford. You've spent time at De Morganton, but now at Stellenzicht. And at Stellenzicht at a really interesting time, because people might be watching this, they might not know this, but Stellenzicht's been through a real metamorphosis, sold, bought, Baron Hans with the string of German names none of us can pronounce, and now part of the broader Erniels group. Give us a little sense of what the last few years have been like for Stellenzicht.
Wow, it's been an adventure. It basically started July 2017, and it started, I want to say, kind of first things first. We really looked at the vineyards, really focusing on replanting, working very closely with Eben Archer and David Simon, and really determining where we want to plant which varieties do we want to plant, looking at that combination of aspect, microclimate, soil, and it's such an interesting farm. I've completely fell in love with the farm the past 4 years, and it's a continuous love affair, because it's so interesting, and it's so various in its soil and its aspects and its ability to showcase various varieties, and so that was kind of the first focus with vineyards for us. And at the same time, running between vineyard and cellar was the kind of the renovation of the cellar. So really kind of bringing, with machinery and equipment, bringing it into the 21st century, investing in great equipment so that all the effort we're putting out, putting in the vineyards outside, that would translate into great opportunities in the cellar for us as well. So I've seen my fair share of jackhammers, and I got to blow up big boulders, and I saw the biggest possible trucks in the past 4 years. It's been a learning curve by itself in construction, but it's all been part of the journey, and it's been great being here from day one in developing almost this rebirth of Stellenzicht. And so with us looking at the vineyards and the soils, we really kind of settled on 4 varieties, which ended up being very traditional Helderberg varieties and Stellenbosch varieties, with a little bit of an oddball there, but Cabernet Sauvignon, Syrah, Cinsault, and Chardonnay.
It's an interesting quartet. The cab makes loads and loads of sense. Louis been making gorgeous cab next to you for ages, and but I love the fact you've thrown in Cinsault, which I think is part of a revival, and Stellenbosch Chardonnay is always a little underrated. We've got your cab, we've also got your Syrah, and we're going to taste them in just a moment. Very quickly though, tell me about is it stone axes found on the property?
Yes. So with us looking at the vineyards and starting to prep the soil, we started seeing all these weirdly shaped stones, not understanding what they were at the stage, and we sent them off to kind of be looked at, and they came back to be Achillean hand axes. So Achillean is a period within the Stone Age where they were starting to kind of chip away and really kind of create tools for themselves. They didn't just use a sharp, pointy edge. You can see how it's chipped away. And then kind of parallel with that, we had a heritage consultant looking into the history of Stellenbosch, which that is a story by itself, which is amazing. But on one of the title deeds in the 1800s, it actually said, not good for crop, only cattle, too many rocks. And that to us and to myself was really kind of an aha moment, where we went and said, we have these Achillean hand axes, and the rocks, they were always here. That's the real kind of heritage and history of Stellenzicht. And that really gave way to all the new names of our wines. So our flagship range, the Achillean range, is a red blend and a Chardonnay. And then we have our 3 varieties, which is a Cabernet, Shiraz, and a Cinsault, all single varieties. And those 3 wines make up the building blocks of our Achillean red blend. And then we have Thunderstone, which is a fun take on Achillean, because the tale goes that they didn't know what these hand axes were before we had all these fancy geologists and ability to date rocks. And they thought it was what happened to rocks when lightning struck it. So the Dutch called it dondersteentjies, and we translated it into thunderstone. So that's more our lifestyle, more easy drinking wines, which also consists of a red blend, which is actually Cinsault driven, lovely wine. It's very much a smash the bottle, not the glass wine, a Chardonnay and a Rosé.
If you have just joined us, we are currently with Associate Professor of Geology at the University of Stellenbosch, Lorraine Burger, who's talking us through some of the cool aspect of where this wine is made. As we race towards the hour mark and wrapping up the show, let's have a quick taste of those two wines. The first one is the Cabernet Sauvignon. I sense there are probably two elements to this, Lorraine, where on the one hand, you are making wine in a part of the world that is just made for great Cabernet Sauvignon, as Louis, amongst others in the region, has shown over a sustained period of time. But by the same token, well, hang on, they make great Cabernet Sauvignon in this part of the world. Expectations are going to be high. Gee, I'd better make sure this is good.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, the Helderberg is very much associated with Cabernet. Stellenbosch is associated with Cabernet. What's really interesting about this is, so the name of this wine is the Tri-Stone Cabernet. Really, it refers to the sites. So we've got really rocky soils up towards the top of the mountain, and then kind of a little bit more decomposed soils, and then a little bit more of that coffee clip towards the bottom. And so we've got Cabernet in all these various sites, and it's really interesting to see expression, how the Cabernet is expressed fairly differently. What I really love about Stellenzicht as a farm and its tannins is, it's different to, you mentioned early house, and it's different in its tannin expression. It's more of a delicate, almost a little bit more of a feminine tannin. So it's not that it doesn't have any tannins, but to me personally, it's a finer, delicate tannin, and it's almost like it's very staggered, which creates a lovely length and elegance to the wine. So a completely different expression than, kind of more that Annandale Valley of the Helderberg. But yeah, it's I'm blessed to have amazing neighbors who make amazing wines. So yeah, the pressure is very much there, but very happy with what we put in the bottle for the first maiden vintage year. And a very elegant wine for me. And I love the freshness of it as well. And that little bit more of a pencil-laid, blueberries, a little bit of violets coming through. I love this wine.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Lorette. I think you might need to send me another 6 cases just for some more research, just so I can make sure I'm completely happy with it. Exactly. It does have that freshness, but it's got a suggestion that the tannins are still there, that it's just beginning to find its feet, it's just beginning to spread its wings, and that if you've got the patience, because it's very, very drinkable right now, but if you can set it aside, then it's definitely going to reward you in another 5 to 10 years with something that's not completely different, but has certainly emerged out of this cocoon into a lovely butterfly of a Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, this is going to be just super.
All right, there's that Californian twang coming through once again. Let's jump over to the other red. Got this one comfortably. The Aronite Syrah. Aronite, that would be the stone from which these vines emerge. Is that right?
Yeah, Aronite is very fancy. It's a sedimentary clastic rock, but it's a fancy way of saying very rocky soils. So essentially, the very rocky soils where we've planted the Syrah, and a very cool story. So the infamous or famous 1994 Stellenzicht Syrah, the one that really kind of created waves for this estate. The vineyard that those grapes come from, they actually took cuttings from that vineyard and propagated again and planted right next to where that original block was. They planted a new block. Unfortunately, that original block we had to take out because of disease, but this is actually made from the same grapes that basically made up the 1994 Syrah. So a great kind of nod to that heritage of Stellenzicht. I feel like Stellenzicht is very much this kind of tale of two stories. One foot's kind of in this very much embedded history, and then there is this kind of, and that's the dragonfly. It's very much that signal of the future, and us looking to find that balance for Stellenzicht and its way forward in Stellenbosch. So yeah, this is about 30% was whole bunch fermented, which gives a lovely warm spice, and then that delicate kind of red with a little bit of red berries and cherries with a little bit of blackcurrant fruit. So great wine, and very excited to see how this block develops because it's actually still fairly young.
It certainly is. I think both wines, though, are a fairly firm endorsement of Baron Staffen, Steinstein, and his decision to add this to the Ernie Els group. And in your hands, Lorraine, it looks like the future is really exciting. Just before we let you go, a quick word on that future. You've just got the 4 varietals. I think we've seen quite a bit of Cab Cinsault returning and echoing some of the great wines like the Chateau Libertas of the 70s and a history of Stellenbosch that kind of died down but is reviving. But what do you as a winemaker have on the cards for us out of Stellenzicht over the next little while?
Yeah, so very excited about the Cinsault. We are buying in those grapes, but our own Cinsault grapes will come into production next year. So super excited about that. And then also, if you are a white wine lover, one of my personal favorites, and I am biased, is Iraqi and Chardonnay, which is a very, very small batch fermented wine in amphoras. So it's basically 2 amphoras and a barrel that got blended together. Amazing wine, definitely one of my favorite drinking wines at the moment. And then coming in September is our Stellenzicht Rosé. So very excited about that. It's currently chilling in barrels, very old barrels, which just gives it a lovely texture and creaminess. So that will be perfectly timed if I get it right, fingers crossed, for summer and spring. And then we are also looking at potentially opening our new tasting pod concept towards the end of the year, otherwise first thing in 2022. So please be on the lookout of that. We'll let you, or we'll promote it on social media and our website and let everybody know.
All right, well, do keep us posted, Lorraine. Thank you so much for joining me. I still can't quite believe you've done quite as much as you have already in your making career. But what's even more impressive is just how much there is still to come, and we'll be following the journey really, really closely. And I think Stellenzicht's new chapter is in wonderful hands. So thanks for the time this evening. Thanks for some great wine, and we look forward to having you back on the show again soon.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having us, and I hope you enjoy those wines. Shout if you need more.
I think that goes without saying. Lorraine Burger, she has worked in Bordeaux in California, Western Australia, Barossa Valley, Marlborough, been at De Morganson, been at Waterford, assistant winemaker at Ernie Els, but now calling the shots at Stellenzicht. And with new ownership, it's a really exciting new journey for an estate that, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a rather long history with in terms of my introduction to South African wine. A couple of final comments from people. Mpomkwanazi is Cinsault steadily growing in South Africa. We certainly are seeing more of it. Some wonderful Cinsault coming out of the Swartland and West Coast, but also Cinsault forming part of that Cab Sav blend that is also returning in Stellenbosch. We're seeing more and more of it. It's a lovely, lovely grape. Fabien Letiec, mais non, I expect that was probably a response to my French accent. Pardon-moi, Fabien, je m'excuse. Schoolboy French from Zimbabwe, my apologies. Johan van Eck, Cinsault, if this, yes, I think that's a response to Poe's question. Well, it's great to see that Cinsault charge. And Impose saying, can't wait for the rosé in time for spring celebrations. And Nontleba, who kicked us off right at the start of the show. Lots on the go, very impressive. Well, I think Stellenzicht is certainly in a state that finds itself in a lovely space and finds itself with a very, very exciting young winemaker. And that wraps us up for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I was, where was I? On Nickel. I was down at the Pick and Pay store there. The collection wine at the moment just getting better and better. It's a wonderful showcase of South African wine. And remember, Pick and Pay has committed to 25 million bottles of South African wine. Those will be bought. Those will be put on shelves. Gives us not just a great selection, but also the chance to support an industry that's been through a torrid time over the last year and some change. And you'll get even better value out of all of that wine if you're a member of the Pick and Pay Wine Club. SMS your smart shopper number through to 36775. If you aren't a member already, you'll get 3 times the smart shopper points on all of your wine, 20% off 10 great wines every month. And there's some fabulous, fabulous, fabulous competitions, including the chance to win over 5,000 Rand worth of Stellenzicht wine. The guys who gave us the very first Cup Classique in South Africa. Buy any bottle of Stellenzicht, bubbles or otherwise, and you will go into that draw. And remember, if you're a wine club member, the details I think will be out in the next week or two. You'll also get a preferential price on the wine dinner, the virtual wine dinner on the 24th of June with Paul Kluver. Andries, the winemaker, was there. I'll be hosting it, and you'll have the food and wine delivered to your door. That wraps us up for this evening. Have a look at that Epicurean episode online at the moment. If you haven't seen it yet, thank you for joining us, and we'll be back on Monday where we talk to Chiara, the genius behind Brookdale. She's one of the most exciting young winemakers in the country, and we also meet a Portuguese guy called Freddie who tries to convince us that wine from Portugal is worth drinking. See you all on Monday night. Thanks for supporting South African Wine. Thanks for watching the show. Have a great evening. Goodbye.